here.
Okay.
So have you ever wanted to be a master, an absolute master in something, whatever it may be? Have you ever wondered why some people have greater power than others? Or why some men and women have a greater ability to seduce and get people to be part of who they are and what they want to do? Robert Greene, 5 times international bestseller. One of the most humble guys I've ever met, joins me today. What a great mate he is as well. He shared so many things with me that I get to share with you today. Wow, I don't really have too many words as far as to do it justice in terms of what this man's achieved. We've got the likes of the world's biggest music artists following his 48 laws of power. Today, we'd get into the in-depth of some of these powers as well. Welcome to the Leadership Show. Welcome to the Happiness Platform. I'm Rose Singh. I'm so happy to bring you a friend of mine and Robert Greene today. Please get your pen and paper out, take some notes, put it into practice, and share this stuff with as many people as you really love and like so they can also prosper. Let's get stuck into it.
Hey, here you go. Why not talk to the guy that's a 5-time international bestseller, but he writes about stuff that's, practical you can put into play, right?
Right.
That's what I love about it. And that's why I'm excited to be talking to you. So welcome to the Leadership Show. Welcome to the Happiness Platform.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Rob.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm highly excited, man. I'm going to just today mainly chat about who you are, what's your thinking like, what you love doing, and then we're going to move into perhaps some specifics of, some specifics around some of your books and some of the laws that I'd like to chat to you about.
Okay.
So it'd be around power strategy, and we'll touch a little bit on the seduction side as well, if that's okay with you.
Okay. Whatever you want, I'm in your hands.
Thanks, man. If there's anything else you want to talk about, I'm really.
Well, are you familiar with mastery or?
A little bit on mastery, but I do want to talk about that mastery bit as well, because there's quite a bit there that from the overview that I had a look at, very similar to. It's interesting. My wife said to me, "Hey, listen, you guys, what Robert writes about, what you talk about, and the way you run companies, it's quite similar in terms of putting those tools to play, particularly around leading people, right?" So why don't we start off with who is Robert Greene? You look like a really chilled guy, and I want to know your nature and how did you get into this form of work, and I love it that when we were conversing and you're like, "Hey, I'm going to go swimming tomorrow," and exactly how you're going to feel after that. And you want to be ready. That's just beautiful.
I'm a creature of habit. I swim every 3 days. I do other exercise every day, but I know exactly how I'll feel after a swim. But it's hard to say who you are when you're yourself. I'm just me. Before I wrote the books, which I started 48 Laws of Power back in 1996. My God, 20 years ago.
Wow.
I was a struggling writer living in a small apartment in Santa Monica, and never quite figuring out who I was. And then suddenly I write one book and my whole life is transformed, but you kind of remain the same person. You don't suddenly, some people are changed by experiences like that, but really for me, I remain the same person, just I had a lot more personal power, I had a lot of success, and of course, it has altered me in a way, but I still kind of remain the kid that I was, and in writing the books, which I've been doing for 20 years, it's a lot of discipline, it's a lot of boring grind work in my home here in Los Angeles. I have a very nice home, but it's where I am most of the time.
Yes.
And going through all of my research, and when I'm writing, which I'm doing right now, I'm very intensely working on the book. I don't do much else. That's pretty much it. I don't go out very much. My girlfriend is a great cook, so she's cooking me lunches and dinners. I have a wonderful cat who keeps me company, and I'm just mostly working on the book, and then taking breaks to exercise. And I meditate every morning. As I said, I practice a form of Zen Buddhism, so I'm heavily into meditation. And, for the deeper questions of who I am, it would take like several hours. I don't even know if I've ever even begun to figure out who I am.
Well, I think, I mean, for me, but it's been a question that I've had, Robert, since I was a child. I go and get some successes in corporations and my own businesses, etc. And there was still an inkling to find out, who am I? Like, why am I here? Type of thing. And I think it's only recently I've been able to find that answer out. Talk to me a little bit more about why do you meditate in the morning? Because it's an essential part of our happiness platform, and I'm delighted.
Well, I've always been very interested in, particularly in Zen Buddhism, but of all Buddhism in general. And I flirted with it for many years. I've read many books. I sort of tried meditation. I did yoga for a long time, but I never quite made it a habit. And what's happened is over the years writing the books, it's taken a mental toll on me. I get so consumed with my thoughts and in my head that sometimes I can't sleep. I can't get away from constantly thinking about the same problems. And so I really needed to meditate to get out of that state of mind that I'm locked into so much. So it was really almost like a life and death thing. If I don't start meditating, I could get heart disease, I could get a heart attack, I could have high blood pressure. But also, I love moments when I'm able to meditate. In fact, swimming for 45 minutes, or I like to do long distances, you are going into a kind of trance-like state. So I was very attracted to it. So I started 7 years ago. I've done it every morning without fail. If for some reason I'm on a flight for 36 hours and I can't, I'll meditate on the flight, or I'll go twice the next. I don't miss a day. And I try and do twice a day, but sometimes I'm not able to. And I do it first thing when I wake up in the morning, because that's by far the best time to meditate. I do it for 35 minutes. Before I start, I read a passage I've accumulated books from the greatest Zen masters, a lot of them very ancient, because I love the oldest writers. They're Chinese, actually, because Zen Buddhism actually comes from China. It grounds me, it's exciting, just like a page, but really deep, interesting thoughts. They're usually always the same thing. Stop conceptualizing, stop intellectual thinking, stop the mind, stop the flow of thoughts. It's always pretty much the same idea. And I meditate for 35 minutes and then I have breakfast. But it has a deep impact on me. It has profoundly changed me. I'm much more calmer. I don't react as much. I have much greater perspective on life. A lot of times when you're meditating and you block all your thoughts, suddenly memories from childhood come rushing up that you've repressed. So I have a much richer sense of my past. And just connecting to things beyond yourself is really exciting. So you're able to sort of stop the incessant mental monologue that goes on in your head, and you're able to sort of flow more deeply with what you're reading or what you're listening to, or when you're out on a walk experiencing it. I mean, I can't tell you, I wish I'd been doing it for my whole life, but 7 years has been just transformed me.
7 years is a wonderful practice, Robin.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm very similar. It's the first thing in the morning. I follow a series of asanas, then pranayamas are very important in terms of the breath. Because as you know, the mind cannot control the mind. Only the breath can really bring it back to center. What I really find, and I think I might have heard you in one of your talks actually say a very similar thing, I find that my most important inspirations come when my mind is very, very clear, and then I get this beautiful thought or an idea and once you learn how to park thoughts, etc., when you're in the meditative state and really go into that trance-like state, as you mentioned, which you can also achieve through, as you mentioned, in swimming at times, right, and stuff like that. And when you were talking about that dedication of staying home, being focused, and just doing your work, writing and finding that flow, you've got, your beautiful girlfriend that will cook for you and you have those meals, etc. How much effort, it's a lot of effort in terms of, obviously, you've got to research a lot of these things, then interpret it and then put it to paper in a way that, it flows and makes sense. How do you feel when you're in that particular process, and how long do you have, I understand it'll probably be different for all books, but how long do you generally dedicate?
Well, I'm in the middle of my 6th book, and it's been the hardest. I think it's the hardest one so far. Either I'm getting old and slowing down, which is possible, or this is the most complicated book I've attempted to write. But normally in the past, 48 Laws of Power took 2 years, which to me seems unbelievable. I can't remember why it went so quickly.
Yeah.
The other books generally took 3 years. Mastery took a little bit more because I interviewed a lot of people for the book, and that process added to it. This one is going to be probably more like 4 years.
Okay.
The research will go on for about a year and a half. Generally, I literally read 300 books to write one book.
Wow.
And I take elaborate note cards, which I can show you. I have it in my drawer here of thousands of cards that I organize by theme. Those cards determine the chapters.
Okay.
If I see 30, 40 cards on the same theme, I go, well, that must be something significant enough to tell me that this should be a chapter. That's usually how it happens.
Right, okay.
I accumulate all of these cards, which are color coordinated, and it's a pretty elaborate system of organization, but I'm a huge believer in organization because you can't really write a book unless your thoughts are well organized, unless you're writing like a stream of conscious novel or something. But if you're trying to help people, if you're trying to be practical, if you're trying to express ideas, you have to organize your thoughts first. So I'm a great believer in that, and the system I have with research organizes my thoughts. Then I start writing. I've been writing now for about a year and a half, and it's very exhausting, I have to say, because I'm trying in the new book, my new book is about human nature. Okay. And each chapter is about an element in human nature. Envy, grandiosity, irrationality, narcissism, character, patterns that people have in their lives. And each time I want to nail it. I want to go, what is the essence of grandiosity? As I was writing that chapter, I happened to have the most prime example in the news for the chapter, Donald Trump. And I could sort of draw inspiration from his madness. But I want to nail what it means for a human being to be grandiose. And so I'm digging and digging and digging and writing, and it's very tedious. But then finally, if I figure it out and it's working, and it takes me 2 months to write a chapter, which is generally the way things are, maybe a little bit more. When I figure it out, I'm very happy, very excited. And when I finish the chapter, I have a little bit of a high, and then it's on to the next idea or chapter. So that's kind of the process here.
That's wonderful. And how often do you find yourself, like when you put a chapter together, do you go over it a few times?
Oh, I'm heavily editing. My first drafts, if people saw them, they would think I was the worst writer in the world. My first drafts are terrible. Second drafts are barely readable. Third drafts are maybe. By the 10th draft, I'm ready to show it to the world.
Oh, hey, you're making me feel a lot better.
Well, everybody's different. Some people can make a first draft pretty close to what they want. I'm just not of that nature. It takes me a lot of revising and cutting. I cut out things that are overwritten, ideas that don't need to be there, expressions that are cliched. I have to cut all that crap out.
Right.
Get to the hardcore stuff.
That's wonderful. I'm glad you actually said that. Because I find there's a lot of that same repetition out there, and people tend to jump on the bandwagon and overuse certain, as you said, certain sayings, etc.
Do yourselves a favour, take some notes, implement some of these recommendations that Robert makes, and I hope you got out of it as much as, multiples of people have. 1.5 million people plus have bought his book. Just one particular book, I don't know how many millions is sold by having 5 international bestsellers. Let's get stuck right into it.
Mate, the Robert Greene that was, before the success of the 48 Laws, you tried a few different things out. Tell me why you tried so many different things out, as work, or I think in particularly work-wise, because you had a lot of jobs, right?
Yeah, my girlfriend and I counted. In one version, we came up with 80 jobs, but I think that includes when I was in high school. Let's say after college, at least well over 50 different jobs, and that's a lot if you do the math.
No, that's huge amount.
And it's hard to explain, looking in the past, what was going on in your mind. But I think in retrospect, I was searching.
Yeah.
I never gave up. I had moments of depression, which are natural, but I never gave up. I kept trying. I kept grinding. I kept saying, "This doesn't work." Go 2 years in journalism. I'm not happy as a journalist. It didn't fit me. It wasn't a good match. I move on to some other form of writing, fiction, etc. And then I traveled a lot. I lived in Europe for about 5 or 6 years, off and on, moving back and forth. I lived in France. I worked in a hotel as a receptionist in a hotel, where I learned, fluent French, at least for back then, and I can read now in French. I lived in Spain for a year and a half teaching English, mostly because I wanted to experience life, experience something else. I'm very interested in other cultures and other languages. But I was searching, and I couldn't find it. I came back to Los Angeles when I was maybe late 20s or maybe 30. My father wasn't well, and I thought, maybe I'll try to do something in Hollywood. Maybe that's what I was meant to do, since I literally am from Los Angeles. And that didn't work, and that felt wrong. And I really didn't like Hollywood. I didn't like the people in it. I didn't like the politics. I didn't like the process of writing. I was very unhappy. And then, kind of luckily, I met a man when I was in 1995 in Italy on a job there through a common friend, a new school in Italy for a media school that he invited me to help launch, figuring out the research and the ideas behind the school. I met this man there who was a book packager, and we were both kind of not happy with the Italian experience. It was great to be in Italy, but the actual job was kind of not very interesting. And he asked me one day if I had an idea for a book. We were in Venice, Italy, one of the most beautiful locations in the world, right opposite the Piazza San Marco.
Wow.
We were just walking.
Wow.
And I improvised the idea that would turn into the 48 Laws of Power. And the rest is history, at least for me. But the idea is, and I talk about it in Mastery, and I gave a TED Talk, which I explain this, is you try something, you know you love something. It could be writing, it could be music, it could be whatever. And you keep trying and you keep experiencing, something will happen. That opportunity, meeting that man, you could call it fate, you could call it whatever, but eventually something will happen if you're ready and you're open. And so if I had met this man 10 years earlier in my life, I wouldn't have been ready to write the 48 Laws of Power. It was luck, it was fate, whatever you want to call it. But I was prepared for the moment because I kept trying, I didn't give up, and I was building real skills. For a writer, the skills were literally writing, journalism, theater, movies, different kinds of discipline. And I learned, you take those 50, 60 jobs, I encountered every type of human being you can imagine.
Wow. Yes,
every kind of manipulator, every kind of power-hungry asshole, every kind of incompetent idiot, in everything, from working in a detective agency to working in a hotel to working for a magazine. All of that went into the 48 Laws of Power.
Perfect. Yeah. I'm always very, very thankful for every little experience that we've had. Doesn't matter which country. When I talk to people about, hey, when we used to live in Fiji, in a little tin house and we used to walk to school with no shoes, etc., and to the blessings that we have today, if I didn't have that experience in my childhood and all that happiness from all the basic stuff, swimming in the ponds and running around in the rain,
Wow.
you know what I mean? I wouldn't know what real joy is, right? I wouldn't appreciate nature like I do today. And,
Right.
coming back to yours, there was a lot of sales in my background when I was younger, because that was the only thing as a job you can get when you're 18-year-old and you've got a little son and a wife and you've got to feed him.
You had a son when you were 18?
18
Wow.
years old was my first son. Yeah,
Wow.
got married then.
Wow.
And so I had to do well, right? I had to do everything possible. So I was focused on mastering, this particular art was sales. I wasn't a natural sales guy, I was quite shy. And then I had to learn, because that was the only job that would pay me well enough so I could pay the rent. And I remember being evicted out of the first place that I ever rented because I was late 2 days to pay the rent, right? And that taught me a lesson that has served me for the rest of my life in terms of how to put things aside, how to plan ahead, compassion, all of that, because I know how I felt and what happened to my little baby when we had to move, all of that.
Right.
So it forms you. So I totally get what you're talking about here. And I encourage, even my oldest son now is 26 and he just finished his master's.
Oh my God.
Be patient, right?
You look too young to have a 26-year-old. That's insane.
Hey, Robert. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, 44 now, 44, yeah, 44.
Wow.
And I've got a little baby who's just only 15 months. So I'm started.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's just joy, right?
Yeah.
So being a father again now, and you use all these experiences from earlier on where I used to work all the time. Now it's like I want as much time with him as possible. So I will work out of my home as much as possible.
That's nice. That's very
I
nice.
won't go to those parties as you mentioned, or those invites, because I want to be here. I don't want to miss out on anything, right?
That's a nice feeling. I like that.
Yeah, and it's the joy it brings and the realness. And you'll know once you've gone through as many changes as you have, and then you've had the success, you know what's real and what's not. Okay?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Look, I want to talk a little bit, I want to dive a little bit deeper into mastery. So,
Okay.
the people that you studied, okay, some of these great folks that you went in and researched, etc.
Yeah.
A couple of things. Any one particular one that always comes back to your mind, and if so, why? Or is there a theme amongst them all?
Well, they come back in different ways. I often think about Leonardo da Vinci because he was so weird and almost of a different order than most humans. He's such a strange person in history. Most people, you can say, well, there was Abraham Lincoln's a pretty unusual character. Maybe there was somebody else in history like, I can't think of anybody like Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah.
He's completely one of a kind. And so I'm sort of fascinated by some of the stranger aspects in of his story that no one has ever even been able to explain. Like, was he really able to foresee technology? He sketched various military weapons that really look like a tank. Was he that uncannily brilliant about mechanical things? I'm always thinking about him, but different people come to mind at different moments. In Mastery, I talk about Mozart because of his struggle with his father. And in all of my books, I talk about the struggle with the father figure, not in an ugly way, but in a positive way, that particularly a boy, has to overcome the father figure in his mind. He has to become himself. He has to grow out of it. He can't live in the shadow of his father. And so if I'm thinking about that in my own life and my own experiences, I always go back to Mozart and that moment a very powerful moment, because here's this child prodigy who was literally instructed by his father, who was his teacher, and a very heavily close-knit family, a lot of guilt involved. Your Wolfgang Mozart are actually paying for the family, your little concerts, etc. To leave his father and his family and establish himself was a very powerful, gut-wrenching, horrifying moment for him, and he did it, and he became who he was. I'm always often thinking about that, but other people will come to mind in a different context. Or I'm writing a chapter right now in my new book about gender, because obviously gender has a huge role in human nature. And I'm thinking of the female scientists that I interviewed for Mastery, and how they explained to me. I was interested in the fact that Yoki Matsuoka is one of the women I interviewed. The female mind works differently than the male mind, even in science. She's a brilliant scientist, but she brings a different kind of energy, a different way of thinking. I'm thinking about that now because I'm writing the chapter. So different parts of Mastery come to me depending on what I'm experiencing.
Excellent, excellent. Look, the father figure discussion, it's very close to me as well. I just had, again, the 26-year-old son.
Uh-huh.
I had a chat with him as he graduated from his master's program in international business. I said to him, "Hey son, and he's always very, very close to me all my life, right? We play sports together. We were in the same teams, and, lots of time together. And I felt that he'd gone down a path where he didn't want to let his dad down, right? So he would make decisions." So I just had this discussion with him, which was around, "Hey, listen, man, go do whatever you want to do. Do it so far different to what I've done, right? Just try new things if that's what you want. But if this is what you really love, then follow this path, right?
Yes.
But don't let my path be anything that holds you back or puts extra pressure on you, right? Okay.
Wow.
So
very nice.
I had to have that conversation. I must say, it was actually inspired by one of your laws.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it was. I've always wanted to have that conversation with him, and I've subtly done it. But then at that moment, I was inspired to have it very, very clearly, and I think he understood, which is really cool, really, really cool.
Okay.
And I want to go to the feminine aspect of what you just mentioned. I'm really glad you brought that up. I had no plans of talking about this, but I'm a big believer in different genders have such power in its own unique way. And I'm a huge believer that women are extremely powerful, right? But the reason that they're powerful is through their caressing and their love and their feminine qualities of, this love and care, and yet their ability to make decisions and be so disciplined and the drive, etc., which I think they have an advantage over men on in many ways. Of course, men, we have other things, right? Well, can you comment a little bit more about in that particular aspect? I know you mentioned that thinking is very different, they're geared different, even in science. But what are some of the standouts? And you may be a little bit early into talking about a new book, but please indulge me if you wouldn't mind.
Well, it's very complex, and it's one of the hardest chapters that I'm trying to write. And I'm trying to say that it's almost impossible for a man to understand the experience of a woman and vice versa. But I'm trying to do my best to sort of explain where these different ways of thinking come from. And first of all, there's the standard definition of masculine and feminine is probably very much outdated now, where all the positive connotations of masculinity, strength, virility, power, etc., and the woman is weak, dependent, emotional, irrational. Those obviously were based on the times and the prejudices of the times, and that's not inherent to female nature. Women are very strong. They're very resilient. they deal with a lot more pain, physical pain, than a man does. I've never been pregnant, but you can imagine that painful experience.
Wow. Totally. Yeah.
So it's ridiculous to label positive and negative attributes. But what interests me is the fact that rationality is generally associated with the male, but it's not. It's not true. Women are very rational. In fact, in some ways, they may be even more rational than men. That they're more grounded. But it's a different form of rationality. So I have gone through a lot of research, a lot of psychologists, a lot of neuroscientists who sort of explain the wiring part of it, how the brains are wired differently, how even among primates, the females are always interested in the group and how people are relating to and how chimpanzees are relating to each other, making sure that there's cohesion, that nobody's left out. And it's the males who are all into competing and being the best and worried about status. And so there is something embedded in us that where still women are more into relating things. They're not into abstracting what's different about this phenomenon. Actually, why is this phenomenon like that one? And uniting them. It's a more synthetic form of thinking as opposed to the male analytic form of thinking. But the other part that I'm interested in the chapter is, to be honest with you, is I'm saying that there's a feminine part in men and a masculine part in women. And this is more of the Eastern way of looking at things. And it's the sort of way we unite these aspects in our personality and become a whole person is actually something that fascinates me. Okay. So it's a chapter I'm writing right now, and it's a little bit hard to explain because I haven't solved all of the problems in it. But the main thing I want to do is find other ways of describing masculinity and femininity without the usual good or bad things attached to it. So what is it about female thinking and female responding to events that's actually extremely effective and very practical, and actually maybe even better than men on many levels? And so a lot of things in the world today are about what make everybody the same, and I'm actually more interested in what makes people different, because I think that's truly more revolutionary to actually focus on otherness. What makes someone from another culture think differently than me? Why do women respond differently? I think the differences are actually much more interesting than the similarities.
I totally have to agree with you, though. I mean, there's so many advantages.
So what are the 3 things that you got out of the chat with Robert? You're going to do something with it? You're going to implement it? I hope so. And please share it with those that you love as well. 2 to 3 people that you want to see do really, really well. Share these tips and tricks with them. Get them to subscribe, and I'll send them also 2 to 3 videos as well. Thanks for joining us. Thanks again to our sponsors at Populous, the people who specialize in high performance, building better lives. I hope you also can build yourself a great life, a high-performing life, a happy life. I'm Rose Singh, and thanks for joining us on the Leadership Show on the Happiness Platform.